The principle of universal individual sovereignty asserts that every human being, by nature of their humanity, holds absolute ownership over their own personhood. This sovereignty is not granted by a state, society, contract, or community. It is inherent, inviolable, and universal. No authority, no document, and no collective decision can justly override this truth. The moment we allow exceptions, we unravel the very definition of liberty. Sovereignty applies fully regardless of circumstances. Whether a person is rich or poor, free or incarcerated, born or unborn, their sovereignty is equal and intact. Sovereignty is not conditional on income, status, behavior, social popularity, or compliance. It cannot be stripped away by debt, revoked by past wrongdoing, or transferred via contract. It is not a license, it is a natural condition of human life. A debt may carry with it obligations and responsibilities, but it does not erase the sovereignty of the debtor. To owe money is not to lose one's autonomy. The creditor may be owed compensation or restitution, but never ownership. To treat the debtor as property, to bind their will or coerce them under the guise of enforcement, is to cross the line from justice to enslavement. Even when consequences must be assigned for wrongdoing, those consequences must honor the offender's continuing sovereignty. This is why rational law demands that all consequences be non-punitive, rationally justified, and least restrictive, preserving freedom wherever possible. A secured person, even one convicted of a crime, must still retain meaningful choices, dignity, and pathways toward rehabilitation. Likewise, sovereignty begins at the first moment of individual human life. Though unborn, the developing human is not a partial being. Their individuality is already present. They are not property, not an organ of the parent, and not an inconvenience to be deleted. They are simply in a state of dependency, as all humans are at various stages of life. Dependency does not cancel sovereignty. The child in the womb is a sovereign being whose life must be protected. To abort that life is to preemptively cancel sovereignty, a direct violation of the core principle itself. The existence of hardship or inconvenience does not justify the denial of sovereignty. Sovereignty is not a function of comfort or consent. It is a universal moral reality. Those who are homeless or destitute are often the most disregarded by society. Yet under the principle of universal individual sovereignty, their rights are no less than those of a billionaire. No one has more moral worth than another, and no one's discomfort at another's presence is justification for curtailing their freedom. The annoying, the eccentric, the mentally ill, the dirty, the disruptive, each is a sovereign human. They are not to be moved, silenced, institutionalized, or excluded without full justification under rational, universal principles. Their existence cannot be deemed a nuisance simply because others disapprove. Every person's place in the world is self-claimed, so long as they do not subtract from the sovereignty of others. No human being can ever be owned. Not by another person, not by a government, not by an employer, and not by a contract. To work for someone does not make you their subject. To agree to terms does not remove the right to revoke consent. Contracts must be upheld as long as they are voluntarily entered and remain within the bounds of moral equality, but consent is always revocable. There is no such thing as permanent servitude under true sovereignty. If a contract demands surrender of that right, then it is invalid at its root. Consent that cannot be revoked is not true consent. It is coercion, repackaged as civility. This is why homeowners associations, HOAs, are illegitimate under the principle of universal sovereignty. They often operate as territorial governments disguised as community management. By moving into a neighborhood, an individual is assumed to have permanently ceded portions of their property rights to a group of unelected rule makers. But sovereignty cannot be waived merely by location. One's land, one's home, one's extensions of self remain part of the individual's domain, not subject to the whims of a board or the preferences of neighbors. Rules enforced without continuous and revocable consent are incompatible with universal freedom. The same critique applies to tribal lands and so-called sovereign nations when they make claims over individuals simply by birth or ancestry. No collective has a higher claim over an individual than the individual themselves. Being born into a culture or territory does not mean one has forfeited autonomy to that structure. Voluntary association is always legitimate. Involuntary allegiance is not. When a tribe, nation, or group assumes control over where someone may live, work, own, or speak based on bloodline or geography, they are violating that person's sovereignty. It must be emphasized, sovereignty is not anarchy. It is not freedom from consequence, but freedom from domination. Sovereignty does not mean people can do whatever they want without regard for others. It means no one has inherent superiority over another. The only justified restrictions on freedom are those that preserve the equal freedom of all. This is why force may be used only in defense, not for control. It is also why consequences for harmful actions must be limited to what is rationally necessary to prevent repeat harm, not what is emotionally satisfying or societally vengeful. Universal individual sovereignty is the foundation of all rational law. It sets the boundary that no system may cross, not government, not religion, not tradition, not business, not social consensus. It tells us that every person, from their first moment to their last, is their own, not subject to authority, not an instrument of collective will, and not a pawn in someone else's vision of order. Every use of power must submit to this principle, every law must bend to it, and every social custom that violates it must be discarded. Even when someone seems to deserve restriction, we must act from reason, not vengeance. Even when someone is weak, they must be protected, not dominated. Even when someone is difficult, they must be heard, not ignored. The test of a just society is not how it treats the strong or the compliant, but how it treats the sovereign human being who is inconvenient, dissenting, indebted, flawed, or unborn. In this vision, freedom is not something given. It is something recognized, and once recognized, it becomes the moral anchor of all human interaction.